Good day, folks, and welcome to Not Just Business. Today, my guest is Doug Hoernle, a serial entrepreneur of note, although he's still a young man. To quote the Allan Gray Fellow, he's like a high-speed freight train. You are at once aware of its weighty cargo and the speed at which it moves. He's always on the move and always busy with the next big venture. So, Doug, tell us about your background. I mean, where did it all start? It seems like you've been an entrepreneur for many years and you're still a young man.
Well, I suspect I always consider myself quite lucky. When kids go to school, they're often streamed into for example, the cricket team, and certain kids are good at cricket and certain aren't. I wasn't very good at cricket, but thankfully I was quite good at sales, and that presented a really nice career in businesses and business building. So key to something I've learned over the past kind of 15, 20 years has been how important sales is. And if you're good at sales, it often reflects into a business. And I've been lucky enough to have found my love of both business and sales to get to a point where we've got some really nice sustainable businesses. Learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, but at the kind of the core, I've learned if you can sell, you can probably build a business too.
Yeah, that's a good point that you make. I've come across so many entrepreneurs that have got great ideas, but they don't know how to sell. And I think that's probably the key skill you need to be an entrepreneur. Doesn't matter how good your ideas are, if you can't sell them, you're not going to go anywhere.
Most certainly, and especially in tech. I think a lot of tech kind of remains in the garage, so to speak. As much as I'm a technologist at heart and I love innovation and I love technology, combining that with the ability to get it out to the garage and into people's worlds and into people's houses has been a really exciting career, and certainly something that I've built on over the past period.
So tell me, are entrepreneurs born or can they be taught or bred?
It's a tough question. Certainly in my case, I wanted to be an entrepreneur since as early as I can remember. I remember dreaming in grade 6 maths class about owning my own business and about being an entrepreneur and starting things and solving problems. So again, that's played out really nicely for me. I do what I love and I'm able to spend all my time doing it. And that's an amazing position to be in, I suspect. And I happen to be kind of good at it, I suppose, at this point. Although many times I thought I wasn't, but you learn a lot of lessons along the way. And I think perhaps a bit of both born, but certainly nurtured. That's for sure.
You say you made mistakes along the way. What are the ones that spring to mind?
Well, there have been many. And the key, I think, I've learned around building businesses and entrepreneurship is people. And managing people is an incredibly difficult task, and certainly something that I'm not sure I'll ever be an expert on, but I guess have improved at over time, and kind of aligning expectations and what people think is possible and what really is possible. So my core mistakes, if there are mistakes, I would more coin them as learnings, have been around people and around putting people in the right roles in certain businesses, but partnering correctly with people. How do you make sure everyone's on the same page as to where one wants to go? Specifically, as the businesses have grown, I mean, our current business has around 30 employees, and it gets to a point where defining priority and defining exactly what it is we want to achieve as a group can maximize the potential of the group and maximize where the group's moving. So that's been a lot of trial and error in my case. And I've been privileged to have started kind of from zero, from one, and gone up and learned the lessons and the bumps and the rides along the route. But I really do believe that if you can solve the people question and solve the sales question, the rest falls into line.
Mm-hmm. So give us a rundown of the businesses that you've started or been partner of. Since when? Since you left school? Or did you actually start at school?
Well, I started a few little, I would call them more sales efforts than businesses at school, which allowed me the opportunity to win a scholarship to study in Cape Town. So I grew up in Johannesburg and won a scholarship, so I was able to choose any university in the country to study at. At the time, I chose to study finance. Reason being, I'd won this, I think it was the old mutual share trading game that they used to play with high school students, and it was the quickest and easiest money I'd ever made in my life. So I thought that was a great career. Jumped down to Cape Town and arrived in Cape Town and decided that as a young student, I fell in love with, as many students do, the alcohol industry, and ended up spending far too much money buying wine instead of making money off that wine. Through that, while studying finance, I decided to learn a little bit about the wine industry. So I took an introductory course to wine, which happened to be a good idea at the time. And I learned an enormous amount about an industry that was fascinating to me. And I was also one of the youngest people who had an interest in this industry. Eventually ended up with a diploma in wine alongside my finance degree. And through that, I got to know a lot of the winemakers in Cape Town and beyond. And I realized that, while I was spending 30 Rand on a bottle of Chenin Blanc, these guys were retailing at a much lower rate. And at one point, I think I was in second year university, I got a phone call from one of the winemakers in Stellenbosch. And he said, "Hey, you're the young student who's interested in wine?" And I said to him, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "Well, I happen to have 1,000 cases of unlabeled Chenin Blanc. Would you be interested?" So I said, "Geez," I didn't have a clue how much 1,000 cases was at the time. I said, "Well, how much?" And he said, "No, I'm willing to give it away at 12 Rand a bottle." And put into compare, I just arrived down from Johannesburg, so the cheapest wine I'd seen was about 32 Rand. So 12 Rand to me sounded like a really good deal. So I just made a call and said, "Yeah, I'll buy it." I went into the calculation. This is replicated numerous times in my life, these kind of instantaneous decisions to do something stupid. But I said, "Yeah, I'll buy it." And sure enough, got the invoice about an hour later, and it was about my year's tuition fee. So I paid away all my food allowance and my living allowance and tuition fee to this winery, not really knowing why. And 2 days later, an enormous truck arrived outside my little 2-bedroom flat in Rondebosch. So a guy rang the bell and I walked downstairs, and I'll never forget this. I can almost feel like I was there right now. The guy rang the bell. I walked downstairs, opened up the door, and there was a truck. To put into comparison, if you can picture the big SAB trucks that drive down Main Road in Cape Town, kind of an enormous delivery truck. So this chap rang the bell, said, "No, I've got your wine order." So I said, "Fantastic." And we went around to the back of the truck, opened up the door, and I said to him, "Well, which cases are mine?" And he looked at me and he said, No, the entire truck." And at that point, I realized, excuse the French, but I was in a lot of shit. And we ended up carting 1,000 cases into my flat, literally pushed the furniture aside, pushed the bed aside. I remember to this day, you couldn't walk into this flat. It was just piled to the roof with cases of wine. And that evening, I sat back and had realized I had no money. I had 1,000 cases of wine. I couldn't move or get into my flat. And there was nothing more to do but to start selling and selling very, very quickly. Or drinking. I did both. I think I drank a case and then made the problem with a hangover the next day. And very quickly, I kind of started to think, well, how do you sell this stuff? And I tried to punt a few bottles to a few friends. That didn't work very effectively. But after about a couple of days of testing this, I started to print labels for university functions onto these bottles and stick the labels onto the wine bottles and go to the residences and go to the university and go to surrounding organizations and say, "Look, would you like beautiful, phenomenal quality Chenin Blanc from Stellenbosch with this incredible personalized label on it?" And it turned out to be a hit. So very quickly, I sold the 1,000 cases, needed to sell a lot more. I think in the end of the day, we must have, over 3 years, probably sold upwards of 10,000 cases of wine, made a lot of money. Initially, this was without a liquor license. I did get a liquor license to make it a little bit more legal, but it was just an incredible entrepreneurial venture. Through my studies, I learned accounts too, doing accounts on my business as opposed to studying from a textbook. And it brought my business degree to life and made it real. But more importantly, it taught me the value of buying something cheap and selling it at a small profit and the excitement that comes with that. And those principles have led into tech. And tech is an incredible environment because you're really selling an asset that doesn't necessarily exist, and an asset that can scale at, as opposed to a wine business where you have to purchase your raw goods and then mark it up and sell. Tech, no such thing. So I've used the principles I learned in selling wine as a student, and it's kind of put me in good stead ever since.
I can imagine the thrill in doing that. So how long did it take you to get rid of those 1,000 bottles of wine?
The first 1,000, I think, once it started going, it went quickly. So what would happen is maybe a head of a residence would say, "We're running a party for 200 students." And I realized they also didn't know what 1,000 cases was. So they would say to me, "Well, how many cases do we need?" So I said, "Well, a student could at least drink a case. So you're going to need 200 cases." And we just ended up selling hundreds of cases, thousands of cases over time. So it was a really fantastic project and a really great way to learn the nitty-gritties of entrepreneurialism. Before studying my final examinations, I had a huge order to fulfill, and I had a call. Either I study Finance 3 or I deliver 1,000 bottles of wine. And it makes life quite real. Up at 3 a.m. while all my mates were studying, I was sticking sticky labels onto wine. And I think that's been my life ever since. I did pass the exam by some miracle, but that could have been blind luck.
And you went on from there, from the wine business. What was your next one?
So that then left me in an interesting space. I had built this little business. I'd made more money than I would make working as a consultant or whatever else students end up doing post-studying finance. And I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I didn't understand that I was starting a great little business. And a mentor of mine who I'd met through the Allan Gray Foundation and through my studies kind of said to me, pulled me aside and said, look, don't go and get a job, kind of do this properly. I'll support you and help you and give you some guidance, but you must get busy on these kind of projects. So I continued to run the wine business, but on the side, I had an innate interest in technology and I'd just come out of the education, or I just finished my studies. So I think I saw myself as a somewhat expert in education, not that I was at all. But what I had learned throughout my studies, I'd done quite a lot of work in townships across South Africa, just kind of volunteer work. And I learned how problematic the distribution of education content into communities around South Africa at the time was. And I had the strong belief that there was an easy way to solve this. At the time, it was, if you remember, kind of early days, or it would have been the early days of instant messaging. And there was a specific product used in South Africa called Mixit, which was a very popular messenger. It was really South Africa's WhatsApp before WhatsApp existed. And I was a big client of theirs back in the day. And I thought, although I had moved on at the time, potentially to the early versions of WhatsApp, the rest of South Africa was starting to use Mixit and using Mixit very effectively as a messaging service, really because it was cheaper than SMS. And it was prevalent in the middle to low income communities. And I realized a lot of these children who didn't have the education that I had did all of a sudden have access to a device. And what you really want to be able to do is marry content with that device. So I set on a mission to rewrite the maths curriculum for high school into what we call a messaging format. So really imagine breaking down the trigonometry topic into kind of 1,000 SMS type messages. Initially, I thought this was going to be an easy project. It ended up being much, much, much more difficult than I expected, similarly to the 10,000 bottles of wine I ordered, I suspect. But I was able to, with them, kind of the proceeds of our wine business, I employed a bunch of ex-teachers and we rewrote this curriculum. And I approached the team at Mixit and I said to them, you have huge connectivity to the low-income communities in South Africa. Can we not put maths content onto their phones and see maybe whether or not they would want to learn this maths content in an easy digestible format? That was fairly successful. For whatever reason, we kind of launched this product and you could go onto Mixit and follow us as a contact and then start to learn maths through your mobile phone. And over a period of 3 years, we're able to reach around 500,000 students, which was a really amazing project to be part of. The problem, however, was how do you fund it and how do you build it into a real kind of business model? And the other problem was, if you're familiar with technology startups in South Africa, Mixit started to really struggle with WhatsApp and smartphones. And Mixit took a strategic decision that maybe they didn't want to move as fast into the smartphone world as they suspected smartphones moved into South Africa. So we were kind of left in a weird position where our platform was obviously Mixit, but we needed to look for a way to distribute content onto smartphones, which were becoming more and more prevalent, not just in the premium schools, but also into low-income schools. And that kind of set us down a mission to say, well, maybe we need to build a version of Mixit for schools and provide a way for schools to communicate more effectively, really to rebuild our audience of students learning on mobile phones. That was probably the first step of mine into the world of technology. I started, as many people do, with the development shop and kind of one of these setups where you say, I want an app. And they say, yes, we want your money. And you pay a bit of money for an app that you don't get. And they end up with a lot of money for an app that you don't get. But I'll cut that story short. Eventually, we did end up with some sort of a messaging app for schools. But by this point, I'd spent far too much money on building the app and nowhere near enough money selling it. So I spent a number of years knocking on schools' doors, trying to make back the money that I spent on building a product that allowed schools to communicate more effectively, so teachers to communicate with parents. And it was an effective product. We never got to the point of actually distributing content through this tool, although that was always an intention. Kind of this whole story was superseded by where we end up now. So at one point through this journey, we started to realize, once you start to see lots of schools, the many types of administration problems within schools. So selling maths content into a school is hard because a maths teacher typically has a very good idea of how they want to teach maths and whether it's on a mobile phone or not. They don't necessarily look at the technology platform distributing your content. They look at the content. And we struggled because, we had our approach of teaching, but whatever teacher we were speaking to had another approach. So the view was to say, well, what other administration issues that are within schools that maybe could provide some sort of a better approach? And the most kind of obvious was about 4 years ago, and this was the beginning to where we are now. My wife was teaching in a school, or at the time my fiance was teaching in a school down the road to us, and I was getting home in the evening doing all of this stuff, and she was passionate about taking her students on trips and activities and outings and what have you. She taught geography. And every evening I would get home and she would have a stash of envelopes on our lounge table and a list of students sticky taped to the wall around our house. And I'd say, what are you doing? And she said, no, she's taking the kids to Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens or taking them to the aquarium. But every time she wanted to take her group of 100 geography students to the aquarium, she would need to collect, call it 50 Rand from 100 parents. And that turned into an administrative nightmare for her. And often she would be sitting with kind of thousands of rands locked up in our drawer at home or her drawer in her classroom. And she would use my system. She would kind of message the parents and let them know that they needed to bring funds into the school. And the parents would then run around, shove change into envelopes, and eventually the money would hopefully end up at the school, if not lost at the bottom of a school bag. So, I looked at this problem and I thought, geez, this is really kind of absurd. We looked at the messages that we were sending through schools across the country, and what we found was about 1 in every 2 messages that goes through a school is a request for cash. So for parents who do have children at schools, they will know this problem really well, whether that's a civies day or a sports tour or an outing activity, stationery pack, you name it. The request from parents to send money in envelopes into schools is a pretty dramatic one in South Africa. So I had a look internationally. I thought, is there a product maybe that does this payments component in schools, and couldn't find anything that was really effective for ad hoc payments in schools. So I then decided, well, maybe it's worth looking at building. And I took a flight early 2016 around the country to see all the banks, because my view was, at its core, you needed to be able to both send a message, which I knew I could do, but also process a payment and solve the reconciliation piece for a school. And the real issue when you're trying to collect 100 Rand from 1,000 parents is school up until before our product was trying to, every time a payment would go through, it would either go onto the school bank account or it would be cash coming in through a teacher. But reconciling all those payments is close on impossible. So what we ended up doing with our partner bank, which is Nedbank, was setting up a trust account that allowed all the money to flow into an account, and we only pay one lump sum over to our school. So if you're a teacher collecting for an aquarium visit, you send out a message to your parents via our mobile app. They're able to then make a quick and easy payment via their phone, collect all the money on behalf of the school, show the school who's paid, who hasn't paid, and pay one lump sum over to the school. That was kind of the idea. We tested that out as a product in collaboration with Nedbank end of 2016. We tested 4 schools in the Western Cape, and it was just an overwhelming success. We had, I think, we collected for a year-end teacher gift, for a sports tour, for a civies day, and for an outing. And of 2,000 parents, I suspect about 1,800 of them downloaded this application and paid their school. The video is on YouTube if anyone who wants to go and watch it. And we kind of filmed the experience from both the school and the teacher. And it was one of these unique, small little problems that was prevalent in every school in the country that desperately needed a solution. And we were able to build a quick, elegant tech solution to this problem. And that's kind of was the, as much as all the original businesses and projects I've been part of, that was the foundations of what we do now and what I spend most of my time working on. So we called the app Karri. Reason for that, in Zulu, in an African language, the slang word for change in schools or tuck money in schools is ikari. And we quite like that as a uniquely South African name with international kind of possibilities. So we named the app Karri, and it just took on. Then on, we kind of repeated the exercise I knew, which is selling into schools, knocked on schools, got our first 10 schools, first 100 schools. It's now used in around 1,000 schools across South Africa. So it's a fairly prevalent app. And most parents, amazing thing about the app is every school that you onboard, we get this parent's information, and 90 to 100% of parents in each school prefer the app as a payment mechanism than any other payment mechanism. So it came with widespread usage through that too. Anyway, sorry, that was a long story to lead to how I got to here.
So that's Karri, that Karri. Okay. So that's amazing. It seems that one of the traits of entrepreneurs is to be seeing opportunity and exploit it quickly.
Exploit it quickly and be willing to adjust fast. If you're in tech, these opportunities don't last very long. So we've learned to be malleable and move as fast as possible to make sure we can solve them and solve them quickly. A key component to all of this, however, has been listening to our clients. So it's now core to our values and our business. I perhaps didn't realize this up front, but something I learned from back in the days of selling wine is how important it is to listen to what your clients need and want and how to provide a solution to them as opposed to something that you think they might. And we've kept those values and built it into our business to date. So everything we've built has been validated with our clients. We speak to around 5,000 school finance people or bursars a day, and everything we now build is validated with their help. So the product is as much built by them as it is by us.
Okay. What are the other skills and habits that you think are essential for success as an entrepreneur?
So I think the most vastly underrated skill or requirement for an entrepreneur is sheer courage. And the only person who, to me, really kind of defined that well is Phil Knight in his book Shoe Dog, around the formation and building of Nike. He's got a beautiful quote and he said, "The cowards never started and the weak died along the way. That leaves us, exclamation mark." And I resonate with that. Courage is everything in this game. You have to stake everything you have countless times. You're on credit card many times and you make big promises to a lot of people and you've really got to do everything you possibly can to try and achieve. Otherwise, I suspect you could end yourself in some sort of mental institution. But yeah, I think, without that, it makes this journey dramatically more difficult. And it's something I've learned, perhaps by luck, perhaps by not knowing what I was doing. But a lot of this has been just having the balls to go for it and see what happens and learn as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. In the South African business environment, what makes it easier or more difficult to be an entrepreneur?
I think that's dependent on what stage your business is at. The bigger the business gets, the more complicated things, HR law, labor law in South Africa is fairly difficult to deal with. And we've had our plenty of busts up with the various CCMAs and goodness knows what in trying to make sure that we can build a malleable business and fill the roles that are required as opposed to the roles that we thought were required at the time. So that can make it tricky and difficult because up front you don't necessarily know what's needed in your business or what you're trying to do. But I think more importantly, and I think to its credit, South Africa is such a unique place from I won't call it cultural, but from a people perspective. You've got everyone here. We've got every kind of culture, every background, every type of person, rich, poor, black, white, it doesn't matter. Everyone's here. And if you're going to try and build a product that can work anywhere, here is such an incredible testing ground for that. Because unlike if you build a product, especially in tech, and I'm obviously specifically looking at tech, but if you build a product in San Francisco and London, it's a very specific group of people that you're trying to solve for. Whereas when you build a product in South Africa, you have all sorts of challenges that I don't suspect you would necessarily face if you were in the high-rise buildings of London. So it gives you a much more real view on what you can and cannot build, and I think opens up such more interesting solutions. And ours in particular is just a really fantastic one because every time that we collect money for a school, first off, we allow the school to end up with more money in their pocket, more kids go on trips, and our teachers spend less time counting funds, which gives you a great feeling every morning. I suspect from that perspective, there's really no better place than here to test and try. We certainly have a lot of problems. So if you're a problem-solving type person, here's a great place to try and find places to solve or things to solve.
Last December, a couple of months before the lockdown, my wife and I were in Switzerland and everything works there. It's ridiculous. You can set your watch by the second hand by the time the train arrives and leaves. And I noticed that, wherever you went, was at restaurants or on the train, people don't smile very often. Then I got back to Cape Town, went to the toilets and the tap wasn't working and there was no soap. And I thought, I'm so glad to be back. There's so many things to fix.
You're so right. And that's one thing that's so interesting. When I travel abroad, I get to the end of it and I arrive back. You just, when you walk through that airport terminal in Cape Town, just get a good feeling. And yes, there are problems, but I mean, there's also enormous opportunity. And I think, I mean, I always look at, not to get too existential, but if you look at the beginning of Alibaba in the late 1990s, Jack Ma obviously started this little e-commerce business. And he's got a beautiful saying. They asked him, eBay entered the technology market in China as soon as he started this business. And someone said to him, well, you know, Jack, eBay now own 95% of the people connected to the internet. And Jack's response was, well, I'm not interested in the million people who are currently connected. I'm interested in the billion who aren't. And I've always thought in my career, South Africa, you know, and Africa in particular has been exactly like that, especially when I was initially starting out. Mobile technology was hardly seen at all. No one knew about it. Now, if anything, we are further ahead from a mobile technology perspective than most developing countries in the world. Mobile money in Africa is world-class and it's more effective than many other countries and many other implementations of the same. And I think, you know, the opportunity to innovate on this continent is only going to continue to improve, especially as we start to add all these clever technology tools.
Mm-hmm. So, Doug, what's on the horizon for you? What are your next steps? Without giving too much away, too much competitive information, that is.
For me, you know, I think the benefit of building a business like I have, it's always been about freedom and choices and doing something meaningful. And I guess I've been incredibly lucky to have been semi-successful in pulling that off. And, you know, in pulling it off, it comes with all sorts of maybe unintended, but sometimes intended benefits. I mean, you make money and you build value. But what I've learned is, you know, the bigger you build, you in a sense get a ticket to building something even bigger. And the point is the freedom to tackle bigger and more difficult things. And tech provides that in buckets. So, you know, there really is never an end to the world of what we can do. I mean, we've got a huge client base in South Africa now. Obviously, an intention will be to build that out internationally. But we've also built in a really, really incredible partnership with one of the big banks in the country. And what's amazing about Nedbank as our partner is they're obviously incredibly interested in what they can do in the youth market and more importantly in the education markets. And we're really at the forefront of allowing them, between them and us, testing incredible financial products that can be used in schools and really help innovate from a financial perspective in schools. So the opportunity to kind of leverage off a 700-pound gorilla like the bank and give them access at ground level to schools in South Africa and work out how we can solve problems around financing, problems around credit, problems around insurance, all these various issues that are required by a school but no one's really looked at is an incredible place to kind of be positioned. And, you know, I always think we've built a fairly large business of solving ad hoc payments in schools. You know, who would have thought one could do that? And if we can do that, I mean, the opportunity outside of that's surrounding us all on a daily basis must be kind of dramatic. So, yeah, I guess it's just continuing down that road and seeing where it leads us.
Mm-hmm. Doug Hoernle, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and you're going to go far. We can all see that. And I'm looking forward to watching your progress. Thanks very much and all the best, man.
Thanks very much, Derek. Appreciate it.
If you would like to leave a comment, our website is www.not-just-business.com. Alternatively, you can send me an email at derek@derekpeed.org.